911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end of the line was sharp, professional, but the response it received was anything but. My friend, Maria, she's gone. She's missing. The caller's voice cracked with a raw, palpable fear. Each word trembled, betraying the frantic desperation gripping them. She left the art show hours ago, and she hasn't come home. She would never just disappear. Static crackled on the line, amplifying the anxiety. Can you give me your friend's name and a description of where she was last seen? The dispatcher's calm, measured tone was a stark contrast to the caller's rising panic. Maria Torres. She's a local artist. She was at the Southwestern Visions art show at the Sena Plaza. She left around 9 p.m., said she was going home. But she never made it. The caller choked back a sob. Please, you have to help us find her. Something terrible has happened, I know it. A brief news snippet flickered across the screen. A local news anchor, standing in front of the brightly lit Sena Plaza, reporting on the opening night of the Southwestern Visions art show. The headline blared. Local artists showcased their talents. Little did anyone know, beneath the veneer of artistic celebration, a dark shadow was about to fall. Maria Torres was more than just a name. She was a vibrant thread woven into the rich tapestry of Santa Fe. A talented artist whose unique perspective captured the very essence of the Southwest, she poured her soul onto canvases, transforming landscapes and cultural symbols into breathtaking works of art. Her pieces weren't just paintings. They were stories told in color and texture, resonating with the spirit of the land and its people. Her art was instantly recognizable, bold strokes, earthy tones, and depictions of the New Mexican landscape that were both realistic and dreamlike. Her signature style celebrated the adobe architecture, the vast desert skies, and the vibrant culture of the region. Collectors and art enthusiasts eagerly sought out her work, drawn to its authenticity and emotional depth. But Maria was more than just her art. She was a warm and generous soul, beloved by her family, cherished by her friends, and admired by the entire Santa Fe community. Her infectious laughter could fill a room, and her genuine kindness touched everyone she met. She had a way of making people feel seen and valued, offering a listening ear and a comforting presence. Her family was her bedrock. She spoke to her mother every day, sharing the details of her life and seeking her wisdom. Her siblings were her closest confidants, sharing in her joys and supporting her through her challenges. And her friends were her chosen family, a tight-knit group who shared her passion for art, her love of life, and her unwavering loyalty. The art show had been a significant event for Maria. It was a chance to showcase her latest collection, a culmination of months of hard work and creative inspiration. She had been excited and nervous, eager to share her vision with the world. The opening night had been a success, with many attendees praising her work and expressing their admiration. According to witnesses, Maria had been in high spirits that evening, engaging in lively conversations with fellow artists, collectors, and friends. She had sold several pieces and received numerous compliments on her talent. Nothing seemed amiss. The last confirmed sighting of Maria was around 9 p.m. She had told a friend that she was feeling tired and planned to head home. She was seen leaving the Sena Plaza alone, walking towards her car, which was parked a few blocks away. That was the last time anyone saw her. When Maria didn't return home that night, her roommate, Sarah, grew increasingly worried. Maria was always punctual and responsible, and it was completely out of character for her to disappear without a word. Sarah tried calling Maria's cell phone, but the calls went straight to voicemail. By morning, Sarah's worry had escalated into full-blown panic. She contacted Maria's family and friends, and together they launched a frantic search. They retraced Maria's steps from the art show, canvassed the neighborhood, and plastered the city with missing person posters. The police were immediately notified and began their investigation. They interviewed witnesses, reviewed security footage, and searched Maria's apartment and car. But the initial search yielded nothing. There were no signs of a struggle, no clues to indicate what might have happened to her. The initial police investigation was thorough, but frustratingly unproductive. The lack of concrete evidence hampered their efforts, and the case quickly stalled. Detectives explored several possibilities, including the theory that Maria had run away, perhaps seeking a fresh start in a new city. But this seemed unlikely, given her close ties to her family and friends, and her deep roots in the Santa Fe community. Another theory was that Maria had been involved in an accident, perhaps a hit and run. But a search of local hospitals and accident reports turned up nothing. The possibility of foul play loomed large, but without any evidence of a crime, the police were limited in what they could do. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the investigation grew colder. Leads dried up, and hope began to fade. The case remained open, but with no new information, it gradually slipped into the realm of unsolved mysteries. The disappearance of Maria Torres sent shockwaves through the Santa Fe community. Her vibrant personality and artistic talent had touched so many lives, and her sudden absence left a void that could never be filled. Friends and family struggled to comprehend what had happened, clinging to the hope that she would one day be found safe. The close-knit art community was particularly devastated. Maria had been a beloved member, and her disappearance cast a pall over the local art scene. Artists dedicated their work to her memory, and galleries held exhibitions in her honor. Maria's family never gave up hope. They continued to search for her, tirelessly following up on any leads, no matter how small. They kept her memory alive, sharing stories about her life and her art. They refused to let her be forgotten. The pain of her disappearance was a constant ache, a wound that would never fully heal. If you are enjoying this story and want to stay up to date on the investigation into Maria's disappearance, make sure to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications. We will continue to follow this case as it unfolds, bringing you the latest updates and insights. Years passed, blurring into a decade then too. The vibrant posters of Maria Torres, once plastered across Santa Fe, faded, torn by wind and rain, mirroring the fading hope in the hearts of those who loved her. The case of the missing artist became a cold case, a file gathering dust in the Santa Fe Police Department, a haunting reminder of a mystery unsolved. The Torres family, though devastated, never truly relinquished their pursuit of justice, making regular, heart-wrenching appeals to the authorities, pleading for them not to forget Maria. The investigators, too, felt the weight of the unsolved case. Detectives came and went, some retiring, others moving on to different assignments. But the shadow of Maria's disappearance lingered in the department, a constant reminder of their failure to bring closure to her family and the community. Each new detective assigned to the cold case unit would inevitably stumble upon the Torres file, poring over the old reports, the witness statements, the meager evidence, hoping to find a spark, a clue that had been overlooked. One such detective was Detective Ray Cruz, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for tenacity. He had a knack for seeing patterns, for connecting seemingly disparate pieces of information. When he was assigned to the cold case unit, the Maria Torres case immediately caught his attention. He felt a connection to Maria, a sense of obligation to find out what had happened to her. He spent countless hours reviewing the original case file, meticulously examining every detail, every lead that had been pursued. He interviewed the original investigators, the witnesses who had spoken to Maria on the night of her disappearance, her family, and her friends. He immersed himself in Maria's world, studying her art, learning about her life, trying to understand her state of mind in the days leading up to her disappearance. Another key player in the renewed investigation was forensic scientist, Dr. Evelyn Reed. A brilliant and dedicated expert in her field, Dr. Reed had joined the state crime lab several years after Maria's disappearance. When Detective Cruz brought the Torres case to her attention, she was intrigued by the challenge. Advances in forensic technology had opened up new possibilities for analyzing old evidence, and she was eager to see if she could find something that had been missed in the initial investigation. She and Cruz formed a symbiotic partnership. He was the boots on the ground, the face of the investigation, while she worked tirelessly in the lab, meticulously examining the evidence. Several factors converged to breathe new life into the cold case. The relentless advocacy of the Torres family kept the case from fading entirely from the public consciousness. Advances in forensic science, particularly in DNA analysis, offered the hope of extracting new information from old evidence. And the dedication of Detective Cruz and Dr. Reed provided the impetus to re-examine the case with fresh eyes and a renewed sense of purpose. A new tip came in, a whisper from the past. An anonymous caller claimed to have seen a suspicious vehicle near the Sena Plaza on the night of Maria's disappearance. The tip was vague and unsubstantiated, but Detective Cruz decided to pursue it anyway. He tracked down the owner of the vehicle, a local man with a history of petty crime. The man denied any involvement in Maria's disappearance, but Cruz sensed that he was holding something back. The re-examination of the evidence began with Maria's car. It had been impounded after her disappearance and stored in a police warehouse. The car had been thoroughly searched in the initial investigation, but Detective Cruz believed that with modern forensic techniques, they might be able to find something that had been missed. Dr. Reed and her team meticulously examined the car, using advanced techniques to search for traces of DNA, fingerprints, and other forensic evidence. They carefully vacuumed the interior, swabbed surfaces, and analyzed every inch of the vehicle. The process was painstaking and time-consuming, but they were determined to leave no stone unturned. They focused particularly on areas that might have been overlooked in the initial search, such as under the seats, in the trunk, and around the door handles. They also revisited items of Maria's clothing that had been recovered from her apartment. Using advanced DNA extraction methods, Dr. Reed was able to isolate trace amounts of genetic material that had not been detectable with the technology available in 1990. The DNA samples were then sent to the State Crime Lab for analysis, where they were compared to known DNA profiles in the national database. It was a long shot, but they hoped to find a match that could lead them to a suspect. During the initial investigation, several individuals had been identified as potential persons of interest. These included Maria's ex-boyfriend, a jealous rival artist, and a stranger who had been seen lurking around the art show. However, none of these individuals had ever been formally charged in connection with Maria's disappearance, due to lack of evidence. Detective Cruz decided to revisit these potential suspects, hoping that new information or a change in circumstances might shed light on the case. He re-interviewed each of them, carefully noting any inconsistencies or changes in their stories. He also delved into their backgrounds, looking for any connections to Maria or any possible motives for harming her. The initial interviews were frustrating. Each person maintained their innocence, offering plausible explanations for their actions and whereabouts on the night of Maria's disappearance. But Detective Cruz refused to be discouraged. He knew that persistence was key to solving cold cases, and he was determined to keep digging until he uncovered the truth. He began to focus on the stranger who had been seen at the art show. Witnesses had described him as a quiet, unassuming man who seemed to be watching Maria intently. He had never been identified, and his presence remained a mystery. The break in the case came unexpectedly, not from a dramatic revelation, but from a microscopic speck of evidence overlooked for decades. It was a fiber, a tiny thread of fabric, found embedded in the lining of Maria's car trunk. During the initial investigation, the fiber had been dismissed as insignificant, a piece of lint or debris. But Dr. Reed, with her meticulous attention to detail and access to advanced analytical tools, saw something more. She recognized the fiber as a synthetic material, relatively uncommon in the early 1990s. It wasn't the kind of fabric typically used in clothing or car interiors. This fiber was unique. The discovery sent a jolt of excitement through the investigation team. It was a tangible clue, a piece of the puzzle that had been missing for so long. Detective Cruz felt a surge of adrenaline. He knew that this tiny fiber could be the key to unlocking the mystery of Maria's disappearance. He immediately directed Dr. Reed to focus all her resources on analyzing the fiber, to determine its exact composition, its color, and its potential source. The urgency was palpable. Years of frustration and dead ends seemed to be melting away, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and determination. They were finally on the verge of a breakthrough. Dr. Reed's forensic analysis was painstaking. She used a combination of microscopic examination, chemical analysis, and spectral analysis to identify the fiber. The process took several weeks, but the results were conclusive. The fiber was a specific type of acrylic, dyed a deep shade of crimson red. Further analysis revealed that the fiber had a unique weave pattern, suggesting that it came from a relatively small-scale textile manufacturer. This narrowed the search considerably. The crimson color was also noteworthy. It wasn't a standard color used in mass-produced garments. It was more of a custom dye, often used in specialty fabrics or in artistic applications. This aligned with Maria's world, hinting at a connection to the art scene or someone involved in crafting. This pivotal forensic technique involved a sophisticated process called microspectrophotometry. This technique allowed Dr. Reed to measure the way the fiber absorbed and reflected light at different wavelengths. The resulting spectral signature was like a fingerprint, unique to the specific dye and material composition of the fiber. Comparing this signature to a database of known textile fibers, Dr. Reed was able to pinpoint the type of acrylic and the specific dye used. This was the crucial piece of information that linked the fiber to a potential source. She also used gas chromatography mass spectrometry to analyze the chemical composition of the fiber. This technique allowed her to identify any trace chemicals or additives that might have been used in the manufacturing process. These chemical markers could further narrow down the possible sources of the fiber. Based on the forensic evidence, the detectives began to develop a profile of the perpetrator. They surmised that the individual likely had some connection to the textile industry, or perhaps to a hobby or profession that involved working with fabrics. The crimson-red color suggested an artistic or creative inclination. Given that the fiber was found in Maria's car trunk, the detectives reasoned that the perpetrator had likely been in close proximity to her vehicle, perhaps even inside it. They started revisiting old witness statements, looking for any mention of individuals who might have had connections to textiles or who had been seen near Maria's car on the night of her disappearance. They paid particular attention to any details that might have seemed insignificant at the time, but which now took on new meaning in light of the forensic evidence. The detectives re-examined the list of potential suspects, focusing on those who might have had access to the specific type of acrylic fiber. They delved into their backgrounds, looking for any connections to textile manufacturing, art supplies, or related industries. They also looked for any evidence of red fibers in their homes, vehicles, or workplaces. The suspect list began to narrow. One name kept resurfacing: Robert Nesbitt, a local carpenter who had done some minor repairs at Maria's house a few weeks before her disappearance. Nesbitt had been questioned during the initial investigation, but he had denied any involvement in Maria's disappearance and had provided a plausible alibi. However, Detective Cruz decided to take a closer look at Nesbitt. He discovered that Nesbitt's carpentry business had struggled in the early 1990s, and that he had taken on odd jobs to make ends meet. One of those odd jobs was working as a stagehand for a local theater group. The theater group used a lot of custom-made costumes, and Nesbitt would often help with repairs and alterations. Furthermore, Nesbitt's alibi, when scrutinized, had several holes. While he claimed to be at home with his wife that night, his wife, when re-interviewed, vaguely recalled him leaving for a few hours. When questioned about his possible connection to red acrylic fibers, Nesbitt became visibly nervous. He claimed that he might have come into contact with such fibers while working at the theater, but he denied ever having been in Maria's car trunk. The detectives knew they were getting closer to the truth. The tension was palpable. The prime suspect was within reach, but they had to proceed carefully. Any misstep could alert Nesbitt and give him a chance to flee or destroy evidence. They needed to gather more concrete evidence before making an arrest. The investigators knew that Nesbitt was a meticulous individual. They also knew that they were dealing with a cold case, and the potential for evidence to be long gone was high. Therefore, they decided that their next course of action should be to place him under discreet surveillance. They needed to observe his routines, his interactions, and his habits without raising his suspicion. The risk of alerting him prematurely was a constant concern. The stakes were incredibly high. The Torres family had waited decades for answers, and the community deserved closure. The detectives felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that their actions could determine whether justice would finally be served. Robert Nesbit, the local carpenter, became the focal point. His connection to Maria, though seemingly insignificant at first, a minor repair job, now loomed large under the magnifying glass of the investigation. His background was unremarkable: a working-class man, struggling to make ends meet, with no prior criminal record. He was married, with grown children, and lived a quiet life in a modest home on the outskirts of Santa Fe. Yet, beneath the veneer of normalcy, the detective sensed a darkness, a hidden secret that he desperately wanted to keep buried. His initial reaction to being questioned again was one of feigned surprise and annoyance. He remembered Maria, he said, a pleasant woman, nothing more. The repairs he had done were routine: a loose railing, a sticking door. He had no reason to harm her, he insisted, no motive, no opportunity. His alibi remained largely the same, albeit with a few subtle inconsistencies that Detective Cruz meticulously catalogued. He had been at home with his wife, he claimed, watching television, a quiet evening. But his wife, when interviewed separately, couldn't recall the specifics of the evening, only that he had been around. The vagueness of her recollection raised a red flag, suggesting that she might be covering for him, or perhaps simply trying to protect her husband from suspicion. The surveillance began subtly. Unmarked cars parked inconspicuously near Nesbit's home, detectives posing as tourists, observing his every move. They tracked his daily routine, his trips to the hardware store, his visits to clients, his evening walks with his dog. They documented his interactions with others, looking for any signs of nervousness, any slips of the tongue, any behavior that might betray his guilt. The surveillance team used a variety of tactics to maintain a low profile. They employed long-range cameras and listening devices, capturing images and audio from a distance. They rotated personnel frequently, to avoid being recognized by Nesbit. They coordinated their movements carefully, using secure communication channels to stay in contact with each other. The detectives were particularly interested in Nesbit's workshop, a small, detached building behind his house. They suspected that he might have disposed of evidence there, or that he might still be harboring some incriminating materials. They obtained a warrant to search the workshop, but they wanted to wait for the right moment, when Nesbit was away from home, to avoid a confrontation. They knew that if they spooked him, he might flee, or worse, destroy any remaining evidence. Gathering additional evidence was a painstaking process, requiring patience, persistence, and meticulous attention to detail. The detectives knew that circumstantial evidence alone would not be enough to secure a conviction. They needed concrete proof that linked Nesbit directly to Maria's disappearance. They started by focusing on Nesbit's connection to the local theater group. They interviewed the costume designers, the stage managers, and the other volunteers, asking about Nesbit's role in the costume-making process. They learned that Nesbit had indeed worked with red acrylic fibers, often using them to repair and embellish costumes. They obtained samples of the red acrylic fibers used by the theater group and sent them to Dr. Reed for comparison with the fiber found in Maria's car trunk. They also searched Nesbit's car, a beat-up pickup truck, for any traces of Maria's DNA or other forensic evidence. They carefully vacuumed the interior, swabbed surfaces, and examined the trunk, looking for anything that might connect him to the crime. The search yielded a few promising leads, including some small red stains on the floor mats. The stains were sent to the lab for analysis, but the results were inconclusive. The amount of material was too small to obtain a definitive DNA profile. The interrogation was a carefully orchestrated dance, a battle of wits between the detectives and the suspect. Detective Cruz and his partner, Detective Martinez, sat across from Nesbit in a small, windowless room. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a table and a few chairs. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with unspoken accusations. Detective Cruz began by reviewing Nesbit's previous statements, pointing out the inconsistencies and the gaps in his alibi. He presented the evidence that had been gathered: the red acrylic fiber, the connection to the theater group, the vague recollection of his wife. He spoke in a calm, measured tone, avoiding any accusations or threats. He wanted to create an atmosphere of trust, to make Nesbit feel comfortable enough to open up and tell the truth. Detective Martinez, on the other hand, took a more aggressive approach. He challenged Nesbit's denials, questioning his motives, and suggesting that he was hiding something. He confronted him with the possibility that he had harmed Maria, that he had panicked and disposed of her body. He used a combination of logic, persuasion, and intimidation to try to break down Nesbit's defenses. The interrogation lasted for hours. Nesbit initially maintained his innocence, sticking to his story, denying any involvement in Maria's disappearance. But as the detectives continued to press him, he began to crack. He became more agitated, more defensive, his answers more convoluted and contradictory. He started sweating profusely, his hands trembling. He avoided eye contact, fidgeting in his chair. The detectives could sense that he was on the verge of breaking. As the pressure mounted, Nesbit's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. He started to offer new explanations, new details, trying to explain away the inconsistencies in his story. He admitted that he had been at the Sena Plaza on the night of Maria's disappearance, but he claimed that he had only been there to pick up a friend. He denied seeing Maria, denied having any contact with her. But the detectives didn't believe him. They knew that he was lying. Finally, after hours of relentless questioning, Nesbit began to crack. He started to sob, his body shaking uncontrollably. He confessed that he had been infatuated with Maria, that he had admired her art, her beauty, her spirit. He had seen her at the art show, he said, and he had followed her to her car. He had offered her a ride, but she had refused. He had become angry, frustrated, and he had grabbed her. He hadn't meant to hurt her, he insisted, but things had gotten out of control. He had panicked, he said, and he had driven her to a remote location, where he had left her. He didn't know what had happened to her after that. The detectives listened intently, their hearts pounding. They knew that they were finally getting the truth. The years of investigation, the dead ends, the frustration, all led to this moment. They had finally found Maria's killer. The confession was a turning point, but it was not the end of the investigation. The detectives still needed to find Maria's body, to bring closure to her family and the community. They pressed Nesbit for more details, asking him to describe the location where he had left her. He hesitated, reluctant to reveal the truth. But the detectives were relentless. They knew that they had to find her, to give her a proper burial, to bring her home. Under intense pressure, Nesbit finally relented, providing the detectives with a detailed description of the location. It was a remote area in the mountains, miles from Santa Fe. The detectives immediately organized a search team, and they headed to the location described by Nesbit. The search was arduous, the terrain difficult. But they were determined to find Maria. They knew that her family was waiting, desperate for answers, desperate for closure. 998 words. Nesbit's confession, fragmented and halting as it was, opened a floodgate. The detectives, sensing their opportunity, pressed him relentlessly, meticulously dissecting his every statement, challenging every inconsistency. His initial alibi, once a seemingly solid wall, began to crumble under the weight of their persistent questioning. He claimed to have been home with his wife, but could no longer provide specific details about the evening, his memory conveniently failing him when pressed about the timeline. He'd said his wife would confirm, but she offered only vague assertions. The pressure intensified when Detective Cruz introduced the physical evidence. The red acrylic fiber, found in the trunk of Maria's car, was presented as irrefutable proof that Nesbit had been in close proximity to the vehicle. Nesbit initially denied ever having seen the fiber, claiming that he had no idea how it could have gotten there. But as the detectives laid out the evidence, detailing his connection to the theater group and his use of similar fibers in costume repairs, he began to backtrack. He admitted that he might have come into contact with such fibers while working at the theater, but he insisted that he had never knowingly brought them into Maria's car. The detectives then shifted their focus to the witness testimony. Several witnesses had reported seeing a man matching Nesbit's description lurking around the Senna Plaza on the night of Maria's disappearance. One witness, a fellow artist, recalled seeing Nesbit talking to Maria briefly, seemingly engaged in an intense conversation. Another witness, a parking attendant, remembered seeing Nesbit's pickup truck parked near Maria's car. While these testimonies were not conclusive, they painted a picture of Nesbit's presence at the scene, further undermining his alibi and increasing the suspicion against him. The weight of the conflicting alibis, the damning physical evidence, and the corroborating witness testimony began to take its toll on Nesbit. He became increasingly agitated, his denials growing weaker, his explanations more convoluted. He started to exhibit classic signs of deception, avoiding eye contact, fidgeting nervously, and sweating profusely. The detectives could sense that he was on the verge of a complete breakdown. The physical evidence linking Nesbit to the crime was meticulously compiled and presented. Beyond the crimson fiber, the detectives focused on fibers retrieved from Nesbit's truck, which, under microscopic analysis, showed a similar weave pattern to those found at his home. The soil samples taken from the treads of the suspect's truck tires were matched with samples collected from the remote area Nesbit was known to frequent. This area was not typically traveled, offering further indication that the suspect was intimately familiar with the location. A crucial piece of evidence came from a re-examination of Maria's personal belongings. A small, seemingly insignificant button was found missing from a jacket she wore the night of her disappearance. The button was unique, made of a specific type of mother-of-pearl with a distinctive swirling pattern. A search of Nesbit's workshop revealed a small collection of buttons, one of which matched the missing button perfectly. The match was confirmed by a forensic expert, providing a direct link between Nesbit and Maria's clothing. The witness testimonies continued to solidify the case against Nesbit. The parking attendant, after seeing a photograph of Nesbit, positively identified him as the man he had seen lurking near Maria's car. He recalled that Nesbit had seemed agitated, pacing back and forth, as if waiting for someone. Another witness, a waitress at a nearby restaurant, remembered seeing Maria arguing with a man who resembled Nesbit earlier that evening. She couldn't overhear the conversation, but she recalled that it seemed tense and heated. These testimonies, coupled with the forensic evidence, painted a damning portrait of Nesbit as a man with a hidden obsession, a man who had been stalking Maria, a man who had been present at the scene of her disappearance. The detectives knew that they were closing in on the truth. The emotional toll on the investigators was immense. Detective Cruz, a seasoned veteran of countless cases, found himself deeply affected by Maria's story. He felt a personal connection to her, a sense of responsibility to bring her justice. He had spent countless hours poring over the evidence, interviewing witnesses, and interrogating suspects. He had sacrificed sleep, time with his family, and his own well-being in pursuit of the truth. The weight of the case pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he refused to give up. He knew that Maria's family deserved closure, that the community deserved answers. Detective Martinez, Cruz's partner, was equally invested in the case. He was a younger detective, eager to prove himself, but he also had a deep sense of empathy for the victims of crime. He had been haunted by Maria's disappearance since he first learned about the case. He felt a burning desire to bring her killer to justice, to ease the pain of her family. The long hours, the emotional intensity, and the constant pressure took a toll on both detectives. They found themselves consumed by the case, unable to think about anything else. They talked about it constantly, bouncing ideas off each other, analyzing every detail, searching for any overlooked clues. They supported each other through the difficult moments, offering encouragement and understanding. They were partners in every sense of the word, united by their shared commitment to solving the mystery of Maria's disappearance. The Santa Fe community watched with bated breath as the investigation intensified. The disappearance of Maria Torres had been a dark cloud hanging over the city for decades. The hope for a resolution, once dimmed by the passage of time, had been rekindled by the renewed investigation. The local news outlets followed the case closely, providing updates to the public as new evidence emerged. The community forums buzzed with speculation and theories, as people shared their memories of Maria and their hopes for justice. The Torres family, in particular, experienced a roller coaster of emotions. The initial hope that the case might finally be solved was tempered by the fear that it might lead to more heartbreak. They had waited so long for answers, and they were terrified that the truth might be too painful to bear. They clung to each other for support, drawing strength from their shared love for Maria. They prayed for a miracle, for a sign that she was at peace, for a resolution that would finally bring them closure. They knew that whatever the outcome, their lives would never be the same. Maria would always be a part of them, a beloved daughter, sister, and friend, whose memory would live on forever. As the detectives closed in on Nesbit, the community held its breath, anticipating the arrest. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the renewed investigation, highlighting the key pieces of evidence and the growing suspicion against Nesbit. The story sparked a wave of outrage and anger, as people expressed their disgust for the man who was suspected of taking Maria's life. Some called for swift justice, demanding that Nesbit be brought to trial and punished to the fullest extent of the law. Others urged caution, reminding people that Nesbit was still presumed innocent until proven guilty. Despite the conflicting emotions, the community was united in its desire for closure. They wanted to know what had happened to Maria, to understand why she had been taken from them so cruelly. They wanted to see justice served, to ensure that her killer was held accountable for his actions. They wanted to heal the wounds that had been festering for so long, to finally find peace and move on. The anticipation was palpable, a collective breath held, waiting for the final act in this tragic drama to unfold. The community had waited decades, and finally, it appeared that the truth was about to be revealed. 1,000 words. The arrest of Robert Nesbit sent a shockwave through Santa Fe. It was a quiet morning when detectives, armed with an arrest warrant, approached his unassuming home on the outskirts of town. Nesbit, seemingly caught off guard, offered no resistance as they placed him in handcuffs. His face was a mask of disbelief, his eyes darting nervously as he was led away to a waiting police car. The arrest was swift and efficient, designed to minimize the risk of a confrontation or escape attempt. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as the procession departed, their quiet street suddenly thrust into the center of a decades-old mystery. The news of Nesbit's arrest spread like wildfire, igniting a mix of emotions throughout the community. Relief, disbelief, anger, and a cautious sense of hope washed over Santa Fe as people grappled with the fact that the man suspected of taking Maria Torres' life had finally been apprehended. The arrest was a culmination of years of tireless investigation, a testament to the dedication and perseverance of the detectives who had refused to give up on the cold case. It was also a validation of the Torres family's unwavering faith that justice would eventually be served. Within hours of the arrest, Santa Fe Police Chief announced the development at a press conference held at the police headquarters. The room was packed with reporters, eager to hear the details of the case. Flanked by Detective Cruz and other members of the investigation team, the chief delivered a prepared statement, outlining the evidence that had led to Nesbit's arrest. He emphasized that Nesbit was presumed innocent until proven guilty, but he also expressed confidence in the strength of the case. The chief detailed the key pieces of evidence that had been meticulously gathered over the course of the investigation. He spoke of the red acrylic fiber found in Maria's car trunk, the connection to the local theater group, the inconsistent alibis, and the witness testimonies that placed Nesbit at the scene of the crime. He also revealed the discovery of the missing button from Maria's jacket in Nesbit's workshop, a crucial piece of evidence that directly linked him to the victim. The public, glued to their television screens and computer monitors, absorbed every word of the announcement. The details of the case, once shrouded in mystery, were now being laid bare for all to see. The evidence presented was compelling, painting a damning portrait of Nesbit as a man with a hidden obsession, a man who had been stalking Maria, a man who had ultimately taken her life. The community, long yearning for answers, finally had a glimpse of the truth. The legal proceedings against Nesbit began swiftly. He was arraigned in Santa Fe County Court, where he was formally charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. His demeanor was markedly different from the day of his arrest. Gone was the nervous uncertainty, replaced by a steely resolve. He stood before the judge, his head held high, and entered a plea of not guilty. The plea was met with a collective gasp from the courtroom audience, which included members of the Torres family and other supporters. They had hoped for a confession, for a sign of remorse, but Nesbitt's defiant plea dashed those hopes. The legal battle was just beginning. The judge set bail at an exorbitant amount, ensuring that Nesbitt would remain in custody pending trial. The date for the trial was set for several months in the future, giving both the prosecution and the defense time to prepare their cases. The news of Nesbitt's plea spread quickly, further fueling the media frenzy surrounding the case. National news outlets descended on Santa Fe, eager to report on the latest developments. The story of Maria Torres, the missing artist, had captivated the nation, and the arrest of her suspected killer was front-page news. Reporters interviewed members of the Torres family, their friends, and colleagues, painting a picture of Maria as a vibrant, talented woman whose life had been tragically cut short. They also delved into Nesbitt's background, exploring his past, his relationships, and his possible motives for harming Maria. The media coverage was intense, relentless, and often sensationalized. The town of Santa Fe found itself under a microscope, its quiet streets transformed into a battleground for media attention. The impact on the community was profound. The arrest of Nesbitt had reopened old wounds, forcing people to relive the pain and uncertainty of Maria's disappearance. The trial promised to be a long and difficult process, one that would undoubtedly stir up more emotions and expose more secrets. But despite the challenges, the community was determined to see justice served, to ensure that Maria's memory was honored, and to finally bring closure to this tragic chapter in Santa Fe's history. The evidence presented to the public in the days following Nesbitt's arrest was carefully curated by the prosecution team. The goal was to demonstrate the strength of their case and to reassure the community that justice was within reach. The focus was on the irrefutable links connecting Nesbitt to the crime scene. The key piece of evidence, the red acrylic fiber, was highlighted prominently. Forensic experts explained the meticulous process used to identify the fiber and to trace its origin to the local theater group where Nesbitt had worked. They demonstrated how the fiber found in Maria's car trunk was virtually identical to the fibers used in costume repairs, providing a direct link between Nesbitt and the crime. The witness testimonies were also presented in detail. The parking attendant's positive identification of Nesbitt as the man he had seen lurking near Maria's car was emphasized, as was the waitress's recollection of Maria arguing with a man resembling Nesbitt earlier that evening. These testimonies, while circumstantial, helped to paint a picture of Nesbitt's presence at the scene and his possible motive for harming Maria. The missing button from Maria's jacket, and its matching counterpart found in Nesbitt's workshop were showcased as a crucial piece of physical evidence. The prosecution emphasized the rarity of the button, highlighting its unique mother-of-pearl design and the unlikelihood that Nesbitt would have possessed such a button unless he had taken it from Maria's jacket. The public announcement of the evidence was a calculated move by the prosecution, designed to sway public opinion and to put pressure on Nesbitt to confess. The strategy appeared to be effective, as the community rallied around the Torres family, demanding justice for Maria. The media coverage intensified, with news outlets dissecting every detail of the evidence and speculating about Nesbitt's guilt. The intense media coverage surrounding the case created a difficult environment for everyone involved. The Torres family found themselves constantly besieged by reporters, their grief and pain exploited for headlines. They struggled to maintain their privacy and to cope with the constant reminders of their loss. The detectives working on the case also faced intense scrutiny. They were under pressure to maintain the integrity of the investigation and to avoid any missteps that could jeopardize the prosecution. They had to be careful about what they said to the media, knowing that every word would be scrutinized and analyzed. The media frenzy even affected Nesbitt's family. His wife and children were subjected to harassment and ridicule, their lives turned upside down by the accusations against him. They maintained their belief in his innocence, but they struggled to cope with the public scorn and the social isolation. The constant media attention created a climate of suspicion and mistrust, making it difficult for anyone connected to the case to lead a normal life. The media coverage was relentless, often sensationalized, and sometimes inaccurate. The reporters were driven by the need to be first with the story, often sacrificing accuracy and sensitivity in the pursuit of a scoop. The town of Santa Fe found itself under a microscope, its quiet streets transformed into a battleground for media attention. 997 words. The trial of Robert Nesbit became a spectacle, a focal point for the grief, anger, and hope that had simmered in Santa Fe for decades. The courthouse, a stately building that had witnessed countless legal battles, was transformed into a stage for this agonizing drama. Every day, the courtroom was packed with spectators, eager to witness the unfolding of justice. Maria's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with a mixture of pain and determination. They were there to represent Maria, to ensure that her voice was heard, to see her killer brought to justice. The prosecution presented a meticulous and compelling case, building upon the evidence that had been revealed to the public. They called a series of expert witnesses to testify about the forensic evidence, meticulously explaining the science behind the red acrylic fiber, the missing button, and the soil samples. They also presented the witness testimonies, carefully highlighting the inconsistencies in Nesbit's alibi and the accounts of those who had seen him lurking near Maria on the night of her disappearance. The prosecution's aim was to leave no room for doubt, to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that Nesbit was responsible for Maria's death. The defense, led by a seasoned attorney known for his sharp wit and aggressive tactics, employed a strategy of undermining the prosecution's case at every turn. They attacked the credibility of the witnesses, attempting to cast doubt on their memories and their motives. They challenged the forensic evidence, questioning the reliability of the scientific methods and suggesting alternative explanations for the presence of the red acrylic fiber and the missing button. The defense argued that the prosecution's case was based on circumstantial evidence, that there was no direct proof linking Nesbit to Maria's disappearance, and that the jury should not convict him based on speculation and conjecture. A key moment in the trial came during the cross-examination of the parking attendant who had identified Nesbit as the man he had seen near Maria's car. The defense attorney grilled the witness about the accuracy of his memory, pointing out that the sighting had occurred decades ago and that his recollection might be unreliable. The witness wavered under the pressure, admitting that he couldn't be 100% certain of his identification. The defense seized on this admission, arguing that the witness's testimony was too weak to be considered credible. Another crucial point of contention was the forensic evidence. The defense called their own expert witnesses to challenge the prosecution's claims about the red acrylic fiber and the missing button. These experts argued that the methods used to identify the fiber were not foolproof, and that there were other possible sources for the button. They suggested that the prosecution was exaggerating the significance of the evidence, and that the jury should not rely on it to reach a verdict. The trial was punctuated by emotional testimonies from Maria's family and friends. Her mother took the stand, her voice trembling with grief, as she spoke of Maria's talent, her kindness, and her vibrant spirit. She described the pain of losing her daughter, the years of uncertainty and anguish, and the unwavering hope that she would one day be found. Her testimony brought tears to the eyes of many in the courtroom, reminding everyone of the human cost of this tragic case. Maria's close friends recounted stories of her infectious laughter, her artistic passion, and her unwavering loyalty. They described her as a free spirit who loved life and who had touched the lives of everyone she met. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of Maria as a person, not just a victim, humanizing her in the eyes of the jury. Nesbit himself took the stand in his own defense. He denied any involvement in Maria's disappearance, claiming that he was being wrongly accused. He maintained his innocence, insisting that he had never harmed Maria and that he had no idea what had happened to her. His testimony was calm and composed, but his demeanor seemed detached and unemotional. He showed little remorse or sympathy for Maria or her family, further alienating himself from the jury. The defense strategy centered around creating reasonable doubt. They argued that the prosecution's case was built on speculation, conjecture, and circumstantial evidence. They highlighted the lack of direct evidence linking Nesbit to the crime, such as DNA or eyewitness testimony. They suggested alternative suspects, pointing to other individuals who had been considered persons of interest during the initial investigation. The defense's goal was to convince the jury that there was enough doubt to acquit Nesbit, even if they suspected that he might be guilty. The emotional testimonies were heart-wrenching. Maria's mother's tearful recollection of her last conversation with her daughter brought many in the courtroom to tears. Her brother spoke of the void Maria's absence had left in their family, a void that could never be filled. Her best friend described the dreams they had shared, the plans they had made, all of which had been shattered by Maria's disappearance. These testimonies were powerful reminders of the human cost of the crime, serving as a counterpoint to the defense's attempts to dehumanize Maria and to cast doubt on her character. As the trial drew to a close, the tension in the courtroom reached fever pitch. The closing arguments were impassioned and persuasive, with both sides making their final appeals to the jury. The prosecution argued that the evidence was overwhelming, that Nesbit's guilt was clear, and that the jury had a duty to bring him to justice. The defense countered that the prosecution's case was weak and circumstantial, that Nesbit was an innocent man, and that the jury should not convict him based on speculation and conjecture. The judge delivered his instructions to the jury, reminding them of their responsibilities, emphasizing the burden of proof, and cautioning them against being swayed by emotions or prejudices. The jury then retired to deliberate, beginning their long and difficult task of deciding Nesbit's fate. The courtroom emptied, the spectators dispersing, leaving behind an eerie silence. The fate of Robert Nesbit, and the hopes of the Torres family, now rested in the hands of 12 strangers. The jury deliberation began. 12 individuals, strangers to each other, were now tasked with deciding the fate of Robert Nesbit. They were sequestered in a small room, cut off from the outside world, with only the evidence presented at trial and their own consciences to guide them. The deliberation process was long and arduous, marked by intense discussions, heated arguments, and moments of doubt. The jurors grappled with the conflicting evidence, the emotional testimonies, and the complex legal instructions. They reviewed the facts, analyzed the testimonies, and debated the merits of the prosecution and defense arguments. They weighed the evidence carefully, considering every angle, questioning every assumption. Some jurors were convinced of Nesbit's guilt from the start, swayed by the forensic evidence and the witness testimonies. Others were more skeptical, concerned about the lack of direct evidence and the possibility of reasonable doubt. They questioned the credibility of the witnesses, challenged the reliability of the scientific methods, and wondered if there was another explanation for the evidence. The deliberations were often contentious, with jurors clashing over their interpretations of the evidence and their opinions of Nesbit's guilt or innocence. They argued passionately, citing specific details from the trial, attempting to persuade each other to see their point of view. As the hours ticked by, the tension in the jury room grew. The jurors were exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but they knew that they had a solemn responsibility to reach a verdict. They continued to debate, to analyze, to question, until finally, a consensus began to emerge. One by one, the jurors started to shift their positions, swayed by the arguments of their colleagues, convinced by the weight of the evidence. The initial vote was not unanimous. There were holdouts, jurors who still harbored doubts about Nesbit's guilt. But the majority of the jury was convinced that he was responsible for Maria's disappearance. They worked patiently to persuade the holdouts, presenting their arguments, addressing their concerns, and reassuring them that they were making the right decision. Slowly but surely, the holdouts began to yield, their doubts gradually dissipating, replaced by a growing sense of certainty. After days of intense deliberation, the jury finally reached a unanimous verdict. The news spread quickly, igniting a wave of anticipation throughout Santa Fe. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as people waited for the announcement of the verdict. The Torres family sat in the front row, their faces etched with anxiety, their hands clasped tightly together. The moment of truth had arrived. 1,003 words. The tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable as the jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. A hush fell over the room, silencing the murmurs and whispers that had filled the air just moments before. All eyes were fixed on the jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with a solemn expression, as she stood to deliver the verdict. The clerk of the court intoned the ritual questions, her voice echoing in the hushed space. Madam Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict? We have, the foreman replied, her voice clear and steady despite the weight of the moment. In the matter of the state of New Mexico versus Robert Nesbitt, on the charge of first-degree murder, how do you find the defendant? The foreman paused, taking a deep breath before uttering the word that would determine Nesbitt's fate and bring closure, or continued anguish, to Maria's family. Guilty! A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Maria's family erupted in tears, embracing each other in a mixture of relief and sorrow. The sound was a release of decades of pent-up grief, a confirmation that their long wait for justice was finally over. Robert Nesbitt, who had remained impassive throughout the trial, showed no visible reaction. He stared straight ahead, his face a mask of indifference, as the reality of the verdict sank in. The clerk continued. In the matter of the state of New Mexico versus Robert Nesbitt, on the charge of kidnapping, how do you find the defendant? Guilty, the foreman repeated, her voice unwavering. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of sounds, sobs, gasps, and murmurs of disbelief. The verdict was a resounding victory for the prosecution, a vindication of the tireless efforts of the detectives who had reopened the cold case and brought Nesbitt to justice. It was also a moment of profound significance for the Santa Fe community, which had been haunted by Maria's disappearance for so long. The guilty verdict brought a sense of closure, a feeling that justice had finally been served, that Maria's memory had been honored. The sense of justice was palpable in the courtroom and throughout the community. For Maria's family, the verdict was a validation of their unwavering belief in justice, a confirmation that their long years of pain and uncertainty had not been in vain. They had never given up hope that Maria's killer would be found, and their persistence had finally paid off. The verdict was a bittersweet victory, bringing them a sense of closure but also reminding them of their profound loss. For the detectives who had worked tirelessly on the case, the verdict was a moment of immense satisfaction. They had poured their hearts and souls into the investigation, driven by a commitment to finding the truth and bringing Maria's killer to justice. The guilty verdict was a reward for their dedication, a confirmation that their efforts had made a difference. For the Santa Fe community, the verdict was a collective sigh of relief. The disappearance of Maria Torres had been a dark cloud hanging over the city for decades, a constant reminder of the unsolved mystery and the lingering pain. The guilty verdict brought a sense of closure, a feeling that the community could finally move on from this tragic chapter in its history. Nesbitt's sentencing hearing was scheduled for a later date. The hearing was a formality, as the guilty verdict on the charge of first-degree murder carried an automatic sentence of life in prison. The judge also sentenced Nesbitt to a lengthy prison term for the kidnapping charge, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. At the sentencing hearing, members of Maria's family were given the opportunity to address the court. Her mother spoke eloquently of Maria's life, her talent, and her kindness. She described the pain of losing her daughter, the years of uncertainty and anguish, and the impact that her disappearance had had on their family. She expressed her gratitude to the detectives who had reopened the case and brought Nesbitt to justice. She spoke of forgiveness, but also of the need for Nesbitt to be held accountable for his actions. Maria's brother also spoke, his voice filled with anger and grief. He addressed Nesbitt directly, accusing him of robbing Maria of her life and of causing their family years of pain. He expressed his hope that Nesbitt would spend the rest of his days in prison, reflecting on the harm he had caused. Nesbitt, who had remained silent throughout the sentencing hearing, was given the opportunity to speak. He declined to make a statement, showing no remorse or sympathy for Maria or her family. The judge then pronounced the sentence, condemning Nesbitt to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was met with applause from the courtroom audience, a collective expression of relief and satisfaction. The impact of the case on the community was profound. The disappearance of Maria Torres had been a defining moment in Santa Fe's history, a tragedy that had touched the lives of everyone in the city. The resolution of the case brought a sense of closure, allowing the community to finally move on from this painful chapter. The dedication of the investigators was also remarkable. Detective Cruz, in particular, had devoted years of his life to solving the case, driven by a commitment to finding the truth and bringing Maria's killer to justice. His perseverance and his unwavering belief in justice had been instrumental in bringing the case to a successful conclusion. The Maria Torres case also highlighted the importance of never giving up on cold cases. Even after decades of inactivity, it is possible to solve these mysteries, to bring closure to the victims' families, and to hold the perpetrators accountable for their crimes. Advances in forensic technology, combined with the dedication of determined investigators, can make the difference in solving these seemingly impossible cases. Maria Torres' legacy lived on through her art. Her paintings, which captured the beauty and spirit of the Southwest, continue to be displayed in galleries and museums, inspiring and moving viewers. Her art served as a reminder of her talent, her passion, and her vibrant spirit. The art community in Santa Fe also paid tribute to Maria's memory, organizing exhibitions and events in her honor. Her friends and colleagues spoke of her influence on their work and her contributions to the local art scene. They remembered her as a kind and generous soul, a talented artist, and a beloved member of the community. Maria Torres' story served as a reminder of the importance of cherishing life, of pursuing one's passions, and of making a difference in the world. Her memory lived on in the hearts of those who knew her, and her legacy continued to inspire and uplift the community. The Maria Torres case was a tragedy, but it was also a testament to the power of hope, the importance of perseverance, and the enduring pursuit of justice. The resolution of the case brought closure to a community that had been deeply affected by loss, and it served as a reminder that even the coldest of cases can be solved with dedication, determination, and an unwavering belief in the truth. The case of Maria Torres serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring impact of unsolved mysteries on communities and families. It underscores the critical importance of law enforcement's unwavering commitment to pursuing justice, regardless of the passage of time. The dedication of Detective Cruz and the advancements in forensic science were instrumental in bringing closure to this decades-old case, offering a beacon of hope for other cold cases and their grieving families. It reaffirms that justice, though delayed, can still be achieved, and that the memories of those lost will continue to inspire the pursuit of truth. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories. Like this video and leave a comment below suggesting other cases you'd like us to cover. Your support helps us continue to bring you these important stories of crime and justice. Thank you for watching. 1002 words.